So it totally depends on the browser, basically. So safe things to use are opacity, scale, transform, like translate, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
In Chrome, at least, one of the things that we have been working on together with folks from Microsoft, because Microsoft Edge is also based on the Chromium project, so they also contribute to that. And one of the things that they took on is hardware accelerated clip path animations and also hardware accelerated background color animations. So in Chrome and Edge and other Chromium based browsers, today it is safe to use, or maybe it's still behind the flag. I should double check it, but like it's going to be safe to use a clip path animation because it will run on the compositor because we optimized things for that. In Firefox and Safari, for example, that won't be the case until they also implement something there. And maybe there's also like a bunch of other properties that are hardware accelerated in Safari, for example, but maybe not in Chrome and vice versa and so on. It's really powerful indeed. CSS has a bunch of built-in functions. For example, the one example that I always use is the light dark function. Light dark is a function that accepts 2 arguments and they need to be 2 colors, because the way how light dark was specified is that, okay, light dark works with colors and that's how it is. But then sometimes like, hold up, like I want to use light dark for more than just colors. For example, if the color theme is light, I want to set the font weight to normal. But if the color theme is dark, then I want to set the font weight to a bit like bolder maybe. So it's like you can't use light dark for that. And with custom functions, we are basically given the power like, well, you can now build this yourself. So you can build your own custom function, which needs to be prefixed by 2 dashes to make sure that the namespaces don't collapse. So you can create a add function -- light dark to create your own light dark. And then in that function, you put not some weird programming stuff or like some novel programming language. So this moves me into the direction of like underlining the key point of scroll-driven animations. So without scroll-driven animations in CSS or in JavaScript, because we also have a JavaScript API counterpart, you would need to have a scroll listener. So you do like document.add event listener scroll or some element add event listener scroll. And then inside of that callback, you then update the style and whatnot of a certain element and move things around on the screen. So that JavaScript is blocking basically. It's running on the main thread, and as you might know, your main thread, it can only do one thing at the same time. So it's either executing JavaScript or doing style or layout or paint, and then like it does the event loop constantly. The key benefit of using scroll-driven animations in CSS or using the Web Animations API is that they are built on top of CSS animations and web animations. And those animations, they know how to run stuff on the compositor, so that's not blocking the main.
Today on Seniors at Scale, we're joined by Bramus Van Damme, Chrome Developer Relations Engineer at Google and one of the leading voices pushing CSS and Web UI forward. From teaching web fundamentals for over a decade to helping shape the CSS specifications themselves, Bramus has been at the front lines of how the web evolves. In this episode, we're going to dive deep in the future of Web UI, what's here, what's coming, and how these new capabilities are changing the way we think about the user experience. Welcome, Bramus. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me, Dan. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. So you've been building from the late 90s. What first drew you to like becoming a web developer?
So to set some time framing there, the late 90s is like 1 terabyte hard disk was like, whoa, that's crazy. We were still running around with floppies. We had 400 megabyte hard disks and so on. Yeah, and back then I was mainly playing with my Legos as a kid, like always building stuff, tinkering with stuff. Not specifically like doing all the instructions, but like building stuff from just out of my head, creativity stream. And then like I happened to follow some course at some point, which was like a person introducing like, hey, there's this thing called email. I was like, whoa, what's email? So I got an email address, and then they also showed me like, oh yeah, by the way, you can like right click on a website and do view source, and you can see all the building blocks that make up the website. So I started like seeing all the Lego blocks on websites, and that's how I basically got into it as a 13-year-old, 14-year-old kid, discovering view source and seeing like, oh, you have a P tag and you have a UL tag, and what does this thing do? And then playing around. So I swapped out my Lego bricks for HTML bricks, basically, back then.
What were you using to use HTML? I think there was a software called Front Page or something like this, or Dreamweaver.
Yeah, those all ring a bell. So I started out with just a notepad, basically like really typing in all the code myself. And then later on, Front Page indeed came out and had these cool effects. Like you could add buttons that had like some sort of 3D going on stuff. That was really cool. But I think in the back it was like ActiveX components or something like that were created for you. Yeah, and then Dreamweaver, Adobe Go Live was also one of the programs, I think. Also did some Flash adventures like Macromedia Flash. Even before, when it was like still from Shockwave, I think. Yeah, it's all starting to come back, all these old things. And to give you an idea of how we built it back then, like if you had a main column with a sidebar or whatever, if you don't know about, you had to like create an HTML table, and then inside of that table you put another table. So you had nested tables all the way down. Font sizes were like 8 pixels big for Ghana. Like your site was optimized for 800 by 600. It's like, ooh, crazy. But fun times. I learned a lot through ViewSource.
That's pretty cool. So I know you're very passionate about CSS. What drew you to it in the first place?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. Maybe it's because I've used font tags and center and bold and so on back in the day. But I kind of liked how the language worked, and I always found myself grabbing back to that. So I had an education in computer sciences where we learned like networking and stuff, and also servers, and then some backend code. But I found myself always grabbing back to HTML and CSS. And I think it's just a language that clicked for me, even though I know a lot of people are like very confused by CSS because they're like, yeah, I'm telling the browser to do this and it's doing something else. Well, for me, that kind of works. Like I'm giving hints to the browser to say like, hey, could you like do this thing, place content center? And then the browser will do it in certain cases, but not in some cases, but like in many cases it will. Yeah, I think it allows me to be very creative in a very, very quick way. Like sometimes one declaration can replace 20 lines of JavaScript code or maybe 200 lines of JavaScript code. I think that's what drawing me in. And of course, like totally agree, like sometimes it gets complicated. Like I also started with CSS, like doing some declarations. Oh, it's not working. Then I'm slapping on a bang important on somewhere to like, oh, now it works. Not really knowing what goes on underneath. And only then a few years later, you learn like, okay, so the C in CSS, that stands for cascade. Oh, and this is now what the cascade actually is. I thought I had an idea, but turns out I didn't. And then over time, you learn all these things, which I also think, by the way, is a superpower. Like you don't really need to know all the internals. But if you want to have like a decent understanding, or if you run into problems, then you do need them. But like most of the time, you can get away with it only superficially knowing what it does, which is a superpower of CSS, I think.
What's one of the OG CSS properties that you really enjoy and you like using?
Tough question. I wouldn't really have an answer to that. Maybe one of the things that I really like about CSS is the selector power. So it's not really a property that I'm using, but like the power of selectors, where back in the day, I always used like IDs to target stuff. And then it's like, no, you don't need IDs. You can like just select all the elements. And I think that's one of the things that I also really like about CSS is that you could say like, hey, all the paragraphs, but then like, no, only the paragraphs in the main section, or only the paragraphs in the footer. Or if you want to select some specific paragraphs, like you can give them a class in your markup and then use those. Or now we have even more powerful selectors where you can do has, not, and child counting, and so on and so on. Yeah, the selectors, I really, really like them.
Yeah, it's a cool feature to be able to manipulate and grab the elements on the page like that. It's really cool. So you're a Chrome developer relations engineer at Google. What's that like? What's your day-to-day like, actually?
So in general, in developer relations, you are basically the voice for web developers. And being a web developer myself, like being a front-end developer myself, I think that really helps. And because we have engineers at Google Chrome who are making Google Chrome and are making Blink, the engine underneath that can render CSS, that can parse HTML and so on. And they are extremely good programmers. But they are C++ programmers. They don't know how to make a website. They know how to parse CSS. They know how to parse HTML. They know all the building blocks. But it's like, don't ask me to build a website. So that comes in handy when, for example, maybe some folks within Chrome come up with an idea like, hey, we need to bring scroll-driven animations, for example, to the web. And that this actually happened back in the day, although it predates my time. So some clever engineers come up like, okay, we're going to build this JavaScript interface, and then we're going to translate it to CSS, and then you had an add scroll timeline, add rule to create a scroll timeline. You could tell that mapped from JavaScript to CSS. It was like a literal translation. Whereas then, I think it was Fantasy back in the day who was external, but now works at Apple. She chimed in and said like, oh, hold up. This is not how CSS developers write their CSS or how people actually build websites. So I think DevRel has this unique situation where we can translate, like on one end, we hear the needs from web developers. If things like the state of CSS or some other service come by, or if we meet you at conferences, like complain to us about stuff, we can voice those needs to our engineering teams. And then together with our engineering teams, we can come up with solutions for that while making sure that those solutions actually map to how you build websites. So we are sitting between Chrome engineering on one end and then web developers on the other end. There's also a third party involved, which is, in my case, a CSS working group, which is concerned with standardizing CSS. Because, of course, if we come up with an idea, well, that needs to be standardized so that other browser vendors can also implement it. Or also the other way around. Like if another browser vendor comes up with an idea, it's like, yeah, cool, write a spec, and then we can use, well, we, meaning our engineers, they can use that spec to then implement the feature in Chrome.
How long does it take normally? Like if you come up with a feature for the other browsers to implement it, or the other way around?
That can go any time from 3 months up to 10 years, maybe even longer. So it really depends on the feature. Thankfully, though, there is something called the Interop effort nowadays. Might have heard of it. It was WebCompat 2021 that we had Interop 2022, Interop 2023, and now we're soon going to have Interop 2026. And that is basically the browser vendors all coming together and saying like, okay, we are hearing from people in the field, from web developers, that these features are not working very well cross-browser or are missing in one of the engines. We should prioritize this, not only to implement it, but also to make sure that they are compatible across browsers. And then that's where WPT comes into play, which is a web platform tests. So it's on the URL wpt.fyi, where there's a bunch of automated tests that get run on a daily, even hourly basis, I think, against all browser versions, including experimental ones, to make sure that, like, if a whole row is green, then you mean, okay, then you can see, like, okay, this test works across all browsers. And for some features, there are like red little red rectangles in there that mean, like, okay, this one specific subtest is failing. And then the goal of Interop is to make sure that we get like all greens, or like a huge enough amount of greens on there. Because, for example, a feature can be like 99% compatible across browsers, and then that 1% might be like one specific edge case that doesn't work in browser A or browser B. And like in practice, that will already be more than good enough for you as a developer to actively use. Mm-hmm. Although hopefully you don't run into that edge case in that case, of course.
And how do you decide internally at Chrome which CSS feature to work on, or what takes priority?
I think this is an awesome question. This is a really awesome question, because people might think like, oh yeah, it's just like sites that Google are building that then request to the Chrome team, like, hey, build this in HTML or CSS or in JavaScript. That's not how it goes. There can, of course, be some requests. Like, for example, Google Search has been actively implementing view transitions on their site for AI mode. Mm-hmm. And then they have surfaced some, like, they have found some rough edges with view transitions, which then led to feature requests. So it definitely is still possible, but the main way how we decide and how to build certain things into Chrome is the voice of authors. So that again is where DevRel comes into play. I've already mentioned the state of CSS survey, for example. Like, that's one of the main drivers that we use in order to prioritize it. If that survey gets taken by an amount of people and everyone on there, or like a big chunk on there, says like, by the way, like, this feature is not working, or this is impossible to do on the web, And that's a very clear signal to us, like, okay, we should dedicate some time on that. And in that case, it can be that Chrome is leading the way with a certain feature, so that we are prototyping and incubating the feature and then like coming up with, okay, oh, maybe like these are the CSS properties that you need for that, or we need to come up with a structure to do that. Or it could be as well another browser that is leading the way. Like one of the main things that we are hearing a lot from developers, like it's crazily difficult to properly style forms, for example. You have to do all on set, and then you can like somehow style it a bit, but it's not really working that well, especially if you have like rich controls. So in that area specifically, led the way together with folks from Microsoft. We led the way on building, on coming up with the customizable select. And there was some active prototyping done by folks at Microsoft, and then it got moved on to OpenUI, and then now Chrome basically has incubated that feature together with the folks from OpenUI, and we prototyped it in Chrome as well. So now we are the first browser to ship that, and that then made it into a spec, and now that spec can then be implemented by other vendors. And another area, like speaking about forms specifically, is like, okay, but what about the non-selects? Like, what about the input type is number and so on? Well, there, folks from Apple WebKit are leading the way. So Tim Nguyen from their team, he has been actively writing a specification to unlock easier styling for forms in CSS. And that is effectively the result of us hearing a lot of complaints from people that it is virtually impossible to properly style forms on the web. To put it in some sort of timeline, customizable select has been worked on for, I think, more than 6 years now, since like the first idea sparked, and then now that we have it, because it relied on a lot of sub features. Like if you open up a drop down, like the menu of the drop down itself needs to be anchored to the button that clicked it. So you need anchor positioning for that. We didn't have it back then. Now we have it. So that one took a long time. Now I have a feeling that for the form controls itself, it's going to be a bit faster, because the customizable select like already paved the way to do appearance-based select. So we're going to have appearance-based input and so on. So I'm hopeful that one will land sooner, and I'm really awaiting to see something land in Safari Technology Preview to play with, because then their team can verify, okay, this is like solving all the needs that developers have. Maybe just a spec in a little in some areas where it's a bit rough on the edges, and then once we have that, well, then other browser vendors like Chrome, for example, or Firefox or Servo or another engine, whatever, and then they can pick up that spec and also to implement it. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I think you mentioned view transitions using in Google search. How could you explain view transitions to someone who hasn't tried them yet?
Okay. Right now, if you say you're building the next Netflix, and you have an overview of all some posters of movies. Right now, if you build that into a website, you click on the poster, and then the page just changes to the big poster, and then the title and the description, and maybe a play button. With view transitions, you can say like, okay, don't just swap out between these two various views, but add a nice rich animation to it using elements that appear on both pages. So for example, what I would expect to happen, and we see that a lot in native apps as well, if you tap an icon in the list, or if you click it, then that photo grows into the big photo on the detailed page. And that's what view transitions unlock. You can say like, hey, on this old page, this thing that you clicked, that is the poster image. And on the detailed page, well, the big photo there, that is also the poster image. And then view transitions will automatically morph from the one thing to the other thing. And the same thing, for example, like with the title underneath that you show, like if you show the title underneath the thumbnail, then that movie title can like move to its new position on the new screen. And if you hit back, of course, in your browser, then it will like move the other way around. So view transitions, they allow you to add like rich transitions between two states of your website, and those two states that can be like full page changes, like I already discussed. Or maybe also like if you are reordering items in a grid or are filtering them. If you add an item to a list, say you start with 4 items and you add a fifth one, well, that fifth one, like maybe that one should like nicely slide in or fade in or whatever. Well, with view transitions, you can do that. It calculates the delta between the two states, and then you can animate that delta. I think it's pretty.
Yeah, I love it. All the demos I've tried, they're really, really cool. Especially the Netflix one, or yeah, I really enjoyed it. How this feature came to life within Chrome?
So it's also one of those features that that people have wanted for a long time. So caveat here is that this predates my time, so I only know half the story. This predates my time at Google. But what I do know is that Jake Archibald, who used to work at Google, who was a colleague of mine for a certain period of time, but now has moved on to work at Mozilla. He was one of the driving forces behind all this. And if I'm not mistaken, at GDS, I think it was 2017 or something like 2018 or 2016 maybe, he already talked about this concept of having shared transitions between shared elements on websites. The idea never went away. Like Jake always kept thinking about it. And then I think 5 years ago, or maybe even longer, it was decided that this would be worked on. And then Jake, together with a bunch of our people from engineering, they worked out the spec, prototyped everything in Chrome. So yeah, this was a huge investment from Chrome's end, figuring all things out as we went. Then sharing the findings with the CSS working group to then get sign off on like, okay, this is how it should work, this is how it can work. And then using that feedback to then like redo the implementation a bit and so on. So yeah, that's one of the features that took a long time between incubation and then actually shipping it. And then once we shipped it in 2020, we shipped same document view transitions. That was like only the beginning, because we always had cross-document view transitions also in mind that work across documents, and then also some additions, like some rough edges that Jake discovered or that I discovered because I took over the work from Jake then here at Google. It's like for example auto naming, where it was like, okay, you have to tag every element with a unique view transition name. So if you are reordering 100 elements in a list, you need to come up with 100 names. Like that's a bit stupid, right? So what if you had something like a view transition name and then like just give it a name. I don't care which one, just give it one. So that's one of the features that got added after we shipped the initial version, but then we kept on polishing things as we went.
That's pretty nice. So what are some best practices that you recommend with view transitions that people use?
Best practice one is don't overdo it. Not everything needs to move.
Does it take a lot of memory to go from one transition to another?
Not specifically, but I'm mainly thinking of users.
For the
Maybe I
users?
should rephrase it, respect the user. Like one thing that you can do is you can use an add prefers reduced motion media query to figure out like, okay, is this visitor okay with motion, yes or no? If they are not, then don't move stuff around from left to right. Like maybe do a crossfade instead. So that's one of maybe a side tangent here. If a person has indicated that they prefer reduced motion, that doesn't equal no motion. So it doesn't mean don't use view transitions, but maybe use different view transitions. So instead of the sliding thing left and right, you can do a crossfade between two things. And so in that sense, even if the user is okay with motion, don't overdo it. You don't want to have 50 items float around on the screen at the same time. People will get nauseous of that. Be selective in what you capture and what you animate. Like clicking on the thumbnail and only moving the thumbnail and growing that one, I think that's good enough. You don't specifically need to also capture the title and move the title along with it, and then also fade in the description and so on. You can easily like add too much to something.
Cool. One question on, not specifically on view transitions, but we can take the view transition as an example.
Mhm.
How do you collaborate with other frameworks like React, Angular, Vue, so they implement this natively as well? Or it's just up to them?
It kind of depends on the feature, of course. Like view transitions is a pretty complicated one because it has to do with browser timings and some built-in heuristics. So maybe that's not the best example. But some other things is that if we see something like becoming a pattern through a library, but it's taking up a lot of code, it's blocking JavaScript and so on. Like for example, a popovers. We've had tons of popover libraries out there on the web. And like it's a well-established pattern by now. But to properly build a popover, you need to not only show the popover and figure out where to position it to, but like if the screen then shrinks, you need to reposition it. If you scroll down and the popover hits the top edge, then like the popover needs to go underneath. So there's a lot of calculation to do yourself there. So that's like one of the things to like, okay, we see this well-established pattern. We want to make it easier for authors to do that. So we're going to build something into CSS. Now that you have the Popover API, this is the perfect opportunity for us to then go back and reach out to those JavaScript libraries and say like, hey, if you go to your source code and you change a few things, you no longer need all this extra calculation logic, and you can embrace the platform, as I like to call it. You can use these built-in features. So that's like one direction where we see a pattern get well established through a library of some sorts. We build something into the web to make it easier to build, and then hopefully by either us reaching out or they doing it themselves, and then the technology trickles back into the library, or the library maybe over time becomes obsolete. Like one of the poster child example there is a jQuery, I think, and I think they had a brilliant motto, which was, it wasn't their motto, but it's like written somewhere on their website, that the goal of jQuery was to no longer exist over time. And I think that was wonderful, because they were plugging all these browser bugs and like selectors. Like we didn't have document.query selector all back in the day, but that was inspired on what jQuery brought to the table. It was like, this is so handy. We should build this natively into the web platform. So yeah, that was the one direction where like we see this pattern, make something for it, and then try and put it back into those libraries by them hopefully doing it, or maybe us reaching out to them. Another thing that of course happens is that like we build something and then we can reach out to libraries out there and say like, hey, by the way, if you use this, you can like reduce your source code by this many things, or your project would very much benefit from it. So for example, my colleague Yuna has been in contact with Adam from Tailwind, Adam Martin from Tailwind, to aid in the support of like adopting add property and so on inside of Tailwind. And I think this is brilliant, because if you're using add property, like you're getting a lot of stuff for free by the browser. So that's awesome. I think I'm not sure though. I think anchor positioning, for example, is also one of those things that are making it into Tailwind, because they are now seeing like, okay, cool, we have this available. We can just use this.
It's really cool. I think I had this issue with Popover API as well. Like I was trying to use it in React and I couldn't, because it didn't have the option, I don't know, a year ago or something like this. But now I think it's available.
Yeah, and then like frameworks like bigger frameworks like I was mainly talking about libraries, but like bigger frameworks like React and other ones, they sometimes get tricky because they have their own virtual DOM that they use.
Exactly.
And then instead of reusing node, what often happens is that like they destroy a node, then create a node, the very same one. Like if you have a list with 5 items, I think if you don't use keys, then like if you add something to it, they just destroy all the ULs and then build all allies and then build them from scratch again. So you end up with different elements happening. Or like if you remove the first one, then some magic happens. So sometimes it's a bit tricky to get the timing right, like the timing interaction between the browser and the framework. Like we saw that with view transitions, for example, because React internally batches all the calls. Like if you do like this variable +1 and then do something else, like React internally batches, and then they flush the queue and like do all the logic. If you wanted to implement view transitions before, because now they have it built in, before you had to call react.flush sync to effectively say to React like, hey, whatever you have in your buffer, like do it, and then do update the DOM, and then you can do the view transition stuff, because view transitions work with DOM diffs. Well, they work with the delta between the old DOM and the new DOM. So you had to like really instruct React like, now do it. And thankfully, like over the past year, we've been having close contact with the React team. We've had regular syncs with them. Not me specifically, but other people here at Google, to make sure that the thing they are building into React, which is now the view transition component, and then some other extra things that go along with it, that it gets nicely built into React and that the timings work out. So the folks at React also did a bunch of changes internally to cater for how view transitions work. Maybe one of the lessons learned there is that like if we had earlier contact with the folks at React, then we would have changed maybe a bit how view transitions work to make it more easy for them to implement it. But yeah, by now it's how it went, and it's great to see that React now has view transitions built in. I think it's in React Canary that you can try it out today, which is awesome to see.
It is. So you've been the primary DevRel for scroll-driven animations, right?
Yeah.
What's new there? What's new in scroll-driven animations?
Oh, what's new in scroll-driven animations? One is that Safari has support for it as of, I think, Safari 26, if I'm not mistaken. So that's great to see, because one of the things that I often hear from people. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I think scroll-driven animations are like the perfect progressive enhancement. It's like, hey, if your browser supports scroll-driven animations, you get a scroll-driven animation. If your browser doesn't support scroll-driven animations, well, you just get the thing without the scroll-driven animation. I think this is like a perfect progressive enhancement. And but one of the things that I heard a lot from people is like, yeah, but it doesn't work in Safari, so we're not even looking into it. That like hits me right in the feelings, right? Because it's like, at least consider it. So yeah, that said, now Safari has it. So hopefully more people will now actively look into it. If you are interested, by the way, I'm going to shamelessly plug scroll-driven-animations.style here, which is a website that I built with a bunch of scroll-driven animation demos. It also contains a extension that you can install into Chrome DevTools to more easily debug scroll-driven animations. And it also includes a free video course. It's 10 episodes. Each episode is about 5 minutes long. I think there might be two exceptions there. But it's 10 episodes that give you all the details on scroll-driven animation. So it's 5 theoretical videos and then 5 more practical, like here's a demo that we're gonna build type of thing. So yeah, if you want to learn scroll-driven animations, scroll-driven-animations also. Where was I? Oh yeah. So what's new with scroll-driven animations? So the Safari support. No word on Firefox yet. Like they have a partial implementation. They've had it for a long time, but it didn't get prioritized. I am kind of hopeful that it might get into Interop 2026 because it was proposed by people and the issue did get a lot of upvotes. So I'm hopeful that like this will definitely help them in the decision process to say, okay, a lot of developers need this, so we're going to prioritize this. So I'm hopeful that it will be in Interop 2026 soon. More on that, I think by January or early February, the program will be announced. And then the third thing is that we, meaning Chrome, we right now have the successor to scroll-driven animations in Chrome is scroll-triggered animations. Because that's one of the things that I always heard from people. It's like, with a scroll-driven animation, there is this direct link between you scrolling and the animation. So it's like scrubbing through a timeline of a video or an audio fragment. If you scrub through it, and then the preview of the video also updates as you, and if you pause scrubbing, then like the frame pauses. So that's scroll driven direct link, but with scroll triggered, it's like once you cross a certain scroll offset, then a time-based animation runs. And we have that right now available in Chrome Canary behind the flag. The spec was resolved on at the CSS working group, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. I'm whipping up some demos right now. I can't share them yet, but I'm building some demos with them, and I think it's going to give you a lot of opportunities. So it's not only like if you scroll down and you cross this scroll offset, like fade in this thing, but also, and if you cross a certain line, then fade it out again, for example. So you can do like entry and exit time-based animations. You can do entry once you roll a line, and then if it goes out, it stays that way, and then if you go back, like then it redoes. There's a bunch of things where you can control the animations, and I think it's a nice addition and the logic successor to scroll-driven animations.
You know, I always liked on Apple when they announced the new iPhone, and they always had this really cool scroll animation, sort of like parallax, but not really. How are they doing it without scroll animations back then? And especially in Safari, which was...
Yeah. So this moves me into the direction of like underlining the key point of scroll-driven animations. So without scroll-driven animations in CSS or in JavaScript, because we also have a JavaScript API counterpart, you would need to have a scroll listener. So you do like document.add event listener scroll or some element add event listener scroll. And then inside of that callback, you then update the style and whatnot of a certain element and move things around on the screen. So that JavaScript is blocking basically. It's running on the main thread, and as you might know, your main thread, it can only do one thing at the same time. So it's either executing JavaScript or doing style or layout or paint, and then like it does the event loop constantly. The key benefit of using scroll-driven animations in CSS or using the Web Animations API is that they are built on top of CSS animations and web animations. And those animations, they know how to run stuff on the compositor, so that's not blocking the main thread. So for example, if you do a scale animation or a opacity animation, a fade in and a fade out, that thing can run on the compositor, so on the GPU, of main thread, so it's not blocking the main thread. And that is like the huge benefit. So yeah, all the effects that you want to do with scroll-driven animations, you can do it using a scroll listener, but then your code is subject to Jank, because if the main thread is blocked, then your animations are also blocked. With scroll-driven animations, that's not the case.
It's cool. Yeah. I feel like even ever since they appeared, the transitions seem much more smoother than the solution with the JavaScript, especially on old computers and stuff like that.
Yeah. So speaking of those animations, one of the things that view transitions use is by default they use a width and a height animation. So that is a bit tricky, because if you are using a width and a height animation, then that runs on the main thread. It's not good by default. Today's canary build, like as you're recording in today's canary build, we have an optimization in place that if the width and the height don't change between the from key, like between any of the keyframes in your animation, then we don't force push it onto the main thread. So if width and height stay the same, it's like, okay, let it pass to the compositor, because it's not changing anyway. And I think this will be a nice performance increase that you just like get for free built into the browser. Like you're just making your keyframes, you're doing your thing, and it's like, oh yeah, this runs really, really smooth now. And like you say, you can really tell if something runs on the compositor or not. Like I've been way too busy with animations over the past 3 years, basically. Now I can see like, okay, this animation is running on the main thread, because I see like a drop frame every once in a while. You get sensitive to it over time. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's one of those things.
What are some other CSS animations that we should avoid because they run on the main thread and they create like junky experiences?
So it totally depends on the browser, basically. So safe things to use are opacity, scale, transform, like translate, and so on. In Chrome, at least, one of the things that we have been working on together with folks from Microsoft, because Microsoft Edge is also based on the Chromium project, so they also contribute to that. And one of the things that they took on is hardware accelerated clip path animations, and also hardware accelerated background color animations. So in Chrome and Edge and other Chromium based browsers, today it is safe to use, or maybe it's still behind the flag. I should double check it, but like it's going to be safe to use a clip path animation, because it will run on the compositor, because we optimized things for that. In Firefox and Safari, for example, that won't be the case until they also implement something there. And maybe there's also like a bunch of other properties that are hardware accelerated in Safari, for example, but maybe not in Chrome, and vice versa and so on. But I don't know the full list from the top of my head right now.
And what's one of your favorite demos that you've built so far in your career?
Oh, there is one that stands out. I think the coolest one that I built is a scroll-driven view transition, which is combining view transitions and scroll-driven animations. And the animation that I built is that you have a music playlist, and at the start, so it's a mobile app, so it's like just a vertical strip, and you start out with a long strip that has like the playlist title, and then a date, and then a photo, and then a small description. And then as you scroll down that list, like you also have the collapsed version of that big card. So you have the big card, which is like all the info. Then you also have the small card. And in that small card, you only have the title in the middle, and then the photo goes to the right, and then the back button to the left of it. And if you look at it from a distance, you know, like, okay, that's 2 states, right? You have the big card and you have the small card. And then in the big card, you have 6 things on there, or 7 things. And in the small card, you only have 3 things. So you can make a view transition to go between that. But the way view transitions work is that you call, well, at least for SPAs, you call a document.start view transition, and in there you update your DOM. And then the browser snapshots the before and the after state. So the thing is that like once you have that view transition going on, where you click it and then you see the thing shrink, it's like, okay, now how can I attach that to a scroll-driven animation? Because I don't want to trigger the thing as you click it. No, I want like as you scroll, the header should nicely shrink, and the photo should move out of the way, and the title should shrink a little bit and reposition itself, and so on. So the hack that I basically did there, and this was inspired by on code by Jake Archibald. He basically came up with a trick like a view transition. You can prevent it from ending if you pause all the animations. because view transitions use CSS animations under the hood. And the thing there is like if all the CSS animations as part of that one view transition are finished, then the view transition is also finished. So Jake wrote this little piece of code where he's like, okay, I'm going to grab all the animations, I'm going to pause them all. And he built this to do like a draggable view transition. So I reused that logic where it's like, okay, once you start scrolling, I start a view transition, I pause all the animations, and then I start tracking the scroll delta. As you keep scrolling, the distance becomes longer as you scroll, and using that delta that is growing, so it's moving forward or backwards as you're scrolling up or down, I am then mapping that to the current time of all the animations of the view transition. And then once you pass a certain threshold where it's like, okay, now this thing is fully collapsed, then I finish off the view transition so that all the textures get released again and so on. And I think that was a pretty nice demo, which took me a few long nights during 2 weeks of working on it, because like I tried so many things, and like eventually I landed on the solution, but I think I have 10 versions trying to get to the solution.
That sounds really cool. Do you have it up online somewhere that I can link to it in the description of the talk?
It's on my codepen.io/Bramus. And I also have a talk about it, which was recorded, and that is at brm.us/scroll-driven-view-transition. But I'm sure you'll make up a list of all the links and put them in the show notes so that people can just click it.
Exactly. I will. That sounds so cool. So another feature that you guys have been working on really hard, and I absolutely love, is anchoring, right? You mentioned it before. I think we were missing this for so long, for years and years and years and years. I'm super happy about it. Can you give us a rundown of what it is? How did you build it, and what can you do with it actually?
Okay, so imagine that you have a little tooltip thingy where you hover over, or if you like click on a little info icon, and then from that info icon comes a little card with a little arrow pointing down to the info icon. That is using anchor positioning. So you say like, okay, this card with all the info, that one is like linked, that one is tethered to the little icon on the screen. And I think it was Kilpatrick from our team who came up with like, okay, this is basically just absolutely positioned stuff, but where you can say like, okay, it's absolutely positioned, but it's like absolutely positioned against this original source element where it should be tethered to. The design went through quite a lot of iterations. Eventually, the folks at Apple, I think it was Fantasy and Jen Simmons, and maybe some other folks at Apple, I'm most likely forgetting some names here. They came up with an easier way to do it, because initially what we had is that like, okay, you could like click it, and then from that popover card, you would set the top to, you would set like the bottom of that card to the top of the anchor itself, so that they will like stick together, and then add like a little gap to it. And then the folks at Apple were like, okay, this is so complicated, because you had to do a lot of manual calculations, like top, right, bottom. That was so difficult. And they came up with an easier way to position things with position area. So that you can like around the thing that you clicked, basically create a grid of 9 cells, which is like the top row, the center row, the bottom row, and then the column to the left of it, column in the center, and column to the right of it. Then you can just say like, okay, this popover that you're showing, you are anchored to the button that I clicked or the icon that I clicked, and then your position area is set to top span left, for example. So it will go above the thing that you clicked, and then it will span towards the left of it. And there's like a bunch of easy keywords that you can use, although there's a lot of keywords, and there's like a combinatory explosion happening if you combine some of them. So you can do a lot of combinations. But I think that this is really, really easy. I can just, and again, this is the power of CSS, right? It's 2 lines. Well, you also need to have the anchor set up, but it's just like saying, okay, position area, top span left, and CSS figures it out all for you. If you want to try and explore this, my colleague Yuna built a wonderful tool for this. It's an anchor-tool, and on there you can like click around and check out the various positions for the various values for position area, and see how they behave. It's really exciting to see. Safari also has it, so it's shipped in Chrome, it's shipped in Safari. I should double check on what the status in Firefox is. I'm not sure, but yeah, I'm sure it's going. Maybe it was even part of Intro. Let me look it up. We'll do it live. Interop 2020,
What would-
WPT.FYI, and anchor positioning. Yeah, anchor positioning is part of Interop 2025. And Chrome is at 99%, Safari at 99.1%, and then Firefox at 71.5%. But we still have 2 or 3 months left in Interop 2025, so I'm sure they'll get there.
what was the developers' reaction to it? I'm guessing everyone was super happy.
It depends. So the thing is, how this typically goes is like, okay, we have something figured out. We think the specification comes up and then it lands in one browser first. And then you see, like I already mentioned, like the adoption story is a bit wobbly because people are like, yeah, but it's not cross-browser. It's not baseline widely available or whatever cutoff point they are using. And then we don't get a lot of feedback from like real world use cases. Thankfully, there are quite a lot of people out there who are quite adventurous and are like actively experimenting with these things and are trying all things out. And in general, yeah, like the feedback is favorable, but then it's also like, oh, but yeah, what about the little triangle between the button and the popover itself? If the popover is above the little icon, I want the triangle to point to the button. But then if you scroll down and the button hits the scroll port at the top, the popover moves to the button. So you want the triangle to be at the top and point towards that thing. So like that's one of those things that then come up later on. It's like, okay, I want to style my popover differently based on which position fallback is being used. And then that, for example, is something that we didn't have in the V1 when we shipped this, but by now we have it. And like for some people, that really is an adoption blocker. It's like, yeah, but as long as I can't do this, then I won't use it. Or as long as it's not in all browsers, then I won't use it. And that's a bit unfortunate, but it's also good, right? Because we are getting a lot of feedback that way. So yeah, side note here with all this, if you find something is missing in a browser or something is really difficult to do, be vocal about it. Like reach out to us, DevRel. Like if you see us at conferences, come pull our sleeve, come talk to us, complain, write a blog post, make a demo, send us a demo. Say like, hey, I tried this, it's not working. Is it me doing something wrong, or is it a bug, or is it like something that doesn't exist on the web platform? And then we can like discuss that internally and like try and figure out, oh yeah, this is a bug, we should get this fixed, or like, this isn't possible, maybe we should come up with a solution. And we can take that feedback back to the CSS working group, and then eventually, hopefully, then something will land in a browser so that you can then do what you wanted to do initially. So yeah, we are here to help you build faster, better, bigger, smoother websites and so on.
I think one last thing that I want to mention, which is a really cool feature that superpowers CSS, is custom functions. We finally have functions in CSS. Yeah. Tell us about them. What powers do they have? What can we do now with them?
Okay.
It really transforms CSS into a programming language, right? Like a true programming language.
It's really powerful indeed. CSS has a bunch of built-in functions. For example, the one example that I always use is the light dark function. Light dark is a function that accepts 2 arguments and they need to be 2 colors, because the way how light dark was specified is that, okay, light dark works with colors and that's how it is. But then sometimes like, hold up, like I want to use light dark for more than just colors. For example, if the color theme is light, I want to set the font weight to normal. But if the color theme is dark, then I want to set the font weight to a bit like bolder maybe. So it's like you can't use light dark for that. And with custom functions, we are basically given the power like, well, you can now build this yourself. So you can build your own custom function, which needs to be prefixed by 2 dashes to make sure that the namespaces don't collapse. So you can create add function -- light dark to create your own light dark. And then in that function, you put not some weird programming stuff or like some novel programming language, you just put in CSS. And the thing that you have to do there is you have to define a result descriptor. So it's a declaration that reads like just property name : and then a certain value. But the name of the property, technically is a descriptor, needs to be result. So in your light dark function, you can say, okay, result is the var -- light that you passed as an argument into that light dark. But then you can also do an add media query in there. Say that if add media color scheme prefers color scheme dark, then you can change the result to be the var -- dark. And that is just CSS. So it's a block of CSS that goes into a function body. And then you can use that dash light dark anywhere you want. I have a blog post on it. We'll also share the link in the show notes, which is thanks to the inline if function, which is something else that landed. You can now have a custom light dark that works with any values, so not just colors, in just 3 lines of code in CSS. And I think this is amazing. Basically, it's a add function dash light dark, then in between parentheses var just a dash l comma dash d, so light and dark. Then in the function body goes result colon, and then in there goes an if that said if color scheme dark, return the var dash dark, else return the var use the var dash light, and that's it. That's the function body. Another exciting thing to go along with that is that CSS custom functions are part of the mixin specification. And so where functions allow you to take some input and produce one single output value, with mixins, you can return like a bag of properties. So you can return like 10 properties using a very similar syntax to custom functions, but the way you apply it is a little bit different. And that's now actively being prototyped in Chrome. And I'm really looking forward to that, because you can see, and again, this is the jQuery story, or this is the library story. You can see that the web platform is catching up. So we had document.query selector all thanks to jQuery. We have CSS custom properties thanks to Sass and Less, and so on. So some other libraries out there. And now we can see that again. There's this core concept of mixins and functions that we know from preprocessors that are now getting built into the core language of the web. And I think this is amazing. The web always catches up. It takes some time sometimes, but in the end, this is, yeah, I think this is wonderful news.
It is for sure. I'm super happy that I no longer need Sass and Less anymore. I can just do everything I want in CSS. Almost, but we're there. We're there for sure. Final question. What are some books you do recommend for my listeners to read? Have to be technical, non-technical, whatever you prefer.
So I'm going to admit something here. I'm not quite that much of a book reader. The only books that I read over the past 20 plus years are the 7 Harry Potter movies. The 7 Harry Potter books, not the movies, or the 8 books. And then I think I read maybe 1 or 2 technical books, because the problem I think with technical books is that they get outdated pretty much quickly. And so I'm so one of those people that, like, if I want to dive into a topic, I go to Google search, and then I search for a certain thing. I open up 10 tabs with all the hits that I find interesting, and then I start clicking around. Then I end up with 100 tabs in one window to then come up with like, okay, so this is how I use it. So I do read a lot, but it's always online articles, tutorials, and not specifically books. Not to say that there most likely are some brilliant books out there that I'm totally not seeing myself. Maybe, unfortunately. So maybe let's flip the question around. If some of the viewers / listeners have suggestions of books for me, reach out to me and let me know which book I should read.
For sure. And any cool blogs that you would recommend? Obviously yours. I really enjoy it.
Yes, I was going to shamelessly plug bram.us, which is my blog. I would also like to plug yuna.im, which is the blog of my colleague Yuna, and then also nerdy.dev, which is the blog of my former colleague Adam. Also follow them on social media. Like Adam always builds a bunch of crazy demos. And then for blog specifically, there's a lot out there. Manuel Matuzovic, Bruno, maybe one to like specifically name Piccalilli. I think you should follow that one. It's piccalil.li, because they're also open to guest posts, and there's a bunch of good stuff happening there. So that's piccalil.li, I think is the URL, something like that. I'm sure we'll find the right link before we even put in the show notes.
For sure. Thank you, Bramus. It's been such a pleasure having you on. I think my listeners learned a lot. I've learned a lot, and again, thank you so much for coming. It was a
thanks again for having me. And again, if anybody has feedback on browsers in general, on missing web platform features, feel free to reach out, and not only to me as DevRel, but also to DevRel from other browsers, so that we know what you need on the web platform, so that we can build the right thing, so that all the websites become faster, better, and more beautiful, and so on.
Yes, and let's fill the state of CSS. It's almost finished, so let's fill it up and say what we need and what we like and stuff like that. Thank you, Bramus. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Dan.